This is the story of Reisling, the blind singer of the spaceways, but not the official version. You sang his words in school. I pray for one last landing on the globe that gave me birth. Let me rest my eyes on the fleecy skies and the cool green hills of earth. Or perhaps you sang in French or German, or it might have been Esperanto, while Terra's rainbow banner rippled over your head. The language does not matter. It was certainly an earth tongue. No one has ever translated green hills into the lisping Venerian speech. No Martian ever croaked and whispered it in the dry corridors. This is ours. We of Earth have exported everything from Hollywood crawlies to synthetic radioactives, but this belongs solely to Terra and to her sons and daughters, wherever they may be. We've all heard many stories of Reisling. You may even be one of the many who've sought degrees or acclaim by scholarly evaluations of his published works. Songs of the Spaceways, The Grand Canal, and other poems, High and Far, and Up Ship. Nevertheless, although you've sung his songs and read his verses in school and out your whole life, it is at least an even money bet, unless you're a spaceman yourself, that you've never even heard of most of Reisling's unpublished songs. Such items as Since the Pusher Met My Cousin, That Red-Headed Venusberg Gal, Keep Your Pants On, Skipper, or A Spacesuit Built for Two. Nor can we quote them in a family magazine. Reisling's reputation was protected by a careful literary executor and by the happy chance that he was never interviewed. Songs of the Spaceways appeared the week he died. When it became a bestseller, the publicity stories about him were pieced together from what people remembered about him, plus the highly colored handouts from his publishers. The resulting traditional picture of Reisling is about as authentic as George Washington's hatchet or King Alfred's cakes. In truth, you would not have wanted him in your parlor. He was not socially acceptable. He had a permanent case of sun itch, which he scratched continually, adding nothing to his negligible beauty. Van der Voort's portrait of him, for the Harriman Centennial edition of his works, shows a figure of high tragedy, a solemn mouth, sightless eyes concealed by black silk bandage. He was never solemn. His mouth was always open, singing, grinning, drinking, or eating. The bandage was any rag, usually dirty. After he lost his sight, he became less and less neat about his person. Noisy Reisling was a jetman, second class, with eyes as good as yours when he signed on for a loop trip to the Jovian asteroids in the R.S. Goshawk. The crew signed releases for everything in those days. A Lloyd's associate would have laughed in your face at the notion of insuring a spaceman. The Space Precautionary Act had never been heard of, and the company was responsible only for wages if and when. Half the ships that went further than Luna City never came back. Spacemen did not care. By preference, they signed for shares, and any of them would have bet you that he could jump from the 200th floor of Harriman Tower and ground safely if you offered him 3-2 and allowed him rubber heels for the landing. Jetmen were the most carefree of the lot and the meanest. Compared with them, the masters, the radar men, and the astrogators, there were no supers or stewards in those days, were gentle vegetarians. Jetmen knew too much. The others trusted the skill of the captain to get them down safely. Jetmen knew that skill was useless against the blind and fitful devils chained inside their rocket motors. The Goshawk was the first of Harriman's ships to be converted from chemical fuel to atomic power piles, or rather the first that did not blow up. Reisling knew her well. She was an old tub that had plied the Luna City run, Super New York Space Station to Layport and back before she was converted for deep space. He had worked the Luna run in her, and had been along on the first deep space trip, dry water on Mars and back, to everyone's surprise. He should have made chief engineer by the time he signed for the Jovian loop trip, but after the dry water pioneer trip, he'd been fired, blacklisted, and grounded at Luna City for having spent his time writing a chorus and several verses at a time when he should have been watching his gauges. The song was the infamous "The Skipper is a Father to His Crew," with the uproariously unprintable final couplet. The blacklist did not bother him. He won an accordion from a Chinese barkeep in Luna City by cheating at one thumb, and thereafter kept going by singing to the miners for drinks and tips, until the rapid attrition in spacemen caused the company agent there to give him another chance. He kept his nose clean on the lunar run for a year or two, got back into deep space, helped give Venusberg its original ripe reputation, strolled the banks of the Grand Canal when a second colony was established at the ancient Martian capital, and froze his toes and ears on the second trip to Titan. Things moved fast in those days. Once the power pile drive was accepted, the number of ships that put out from the Luna Terra system was limited only by the availability of crews. Jetmen were scarce. The shielding was cut to a minimum to save weight, and few married men cared to risk possible exposure to radioactivity. Reisling did not want to be a father, so jobs were always open to him during the golden days of the claiming boom. He crossed and recrossed the system, singing the doggerel that boiled up in his head and courting it out on his accordion. The master of the Goshawk knew him. Captain Hicks had been astrogator on Reisling's first trip in her. "Welcome home, Noisy," Hicks had greeted him. "Are you sober, or shall I sign the book for you?" "You can't get drunk on the bug juice they sell here, Skipper." He signed and went below, lugging his accordion. 10 minutes later, he was back. "Captain," he stated darkly, "that number 2 jet ain't fit. The cadmium dampers are warped." "Why tell me? Tell the chief." "I did, but he says they'll do." "He's wrong." The captain gestured at the book. "Scratch out your name and scram. We raise ship in 30 minutes. Reisling looked at him, shrugged, and went below again. It's a long climb to the Jovian planetoids. A Hawk-class clunker had to blast for 3 watches before going into free flight. Reisling had the second watch. Damping was done by hand then with a multiplying vernier and a danger gauge. When the gauge showed red, he tried to correct it. No luck. Jetmen don't wait. That's why they are jetmen. He slapped the emergency discover and fished at the hot stuff with the tongs. The lights went out. He went right ahead. A jetman has to know his power room the way your tongue knows the inside of your mouth. He sneaked a quick look over the top of the lead baffle when the lights went out. The blue radioactive glow did not help him any. He jerked his head back and went on fishing by touch. When he was done, he called over the tube. "Number 2 jet out, and for Christ's sake, get me some light down here." There was light, the emergency circuit, but not for him. The blue radioactive glow was the last thing his optic nerve ever responded to. As time and space come bending back to shape this star-specked scene, the tranquil tears of tragic joy still spread their silver sheen. Along the Grand Canal still soar the fragile towers of truth. Their fairy grace defends this place of beauty, calm and couth. Bone-tired, the race that raised the towers, forgotten are their lores. Long gone the gods who shed the tears that lapped these crystal shores. Slow beats the time-worn heart of Mars beneath this icy sky. The thin air whispers voicelessly that all who live must die. Yet still the lacy spires of truth sing beauty's madrigal, and she herself will ever dwell along the Grand Canal. From the Grand Canal, by permission of Lux Transcriptions Limited, London and Luna City. On the swing back, they set Reisling down on Mars at Drywater. The boys passed the hat, and the skipper kicked in a half-month's pay. That was all. Fini. Just another space bum who'd not had the good fortune to finish it off when his luck ran out. He holed up with the prospectors and archaeologists at How Far for a month or so, and could probably have stayed forever in exchange for his songs and his accordion playing. But spacemen die if they stay in one place. He hooked the crawler over to Drywater again, and thence to Marsopolis. The capital was well into its boom. The processing plants lined the Grand Canal on both sides and roiled the ancient waters with the filth of the runoff. This was before the Tri-Planet Treaty forbade disturbing cultural relics for commerce. Half the slender fairy-like towers had been torn down, and others were disfigured to adapt them as pressurized buildings for Earthmen. Now, Reisling had never seen any of these changes, and no one described them to him. When he saw Marsopolis again, he visualized it as it had been before it was rationalized for trade. His memory was good. He stood on the riparian esplanade where the ancient great of Mars had taken their ease and saw its beauty spreading out before his blinded eyes. Ice-blue plain of water unmoved by tide, untouched by breeze, and reflecting serenely the sharp, bright stars of the Martian sky. And beyond the water, the lacy buttresses and flying towers of an architecture too delicate for our rumbling, heavy planet. The result was Grand Canal. The subtle change in his orientation, which enabled him to see beauty at Marsopolis, where beauty was not now, began to affect his whole life. All women became beautiful to him. He knew them by their voices and fitted their appearances to the sounds. It is a mean spirit indeed who will speak to a blind man other than in gentle friendliness. Scolds who had given their husbands no peace sweetened their voices to Reisling. It populated his world with beautiful women and gracious men. Dark Star Passing, Berenice's Hair, Death Song of a Woods Colt, and his other love songs of the wanderers, the womenless men of space, were the direct result of the fact that his conceptions were unsullied by tawdry truths. It mellowed his approach, changed his doggerel to verse, and sometimes even to poetry. He had plenty of time to think now, time to get all the lovely words just so, and to worry a verse until it sang true in his head, the monotonous beat of jet song. When the field is clear, the report's all seen, when the lock sighs shut, when the lights wink green, when the checkoff's done, when it's time to pray, when the captain nods, when she blasts away. Hear the jets, hear them snort at your back. When you're stretched on the rack, feel your ribs clamp your chest. Feel your neck grind its rest, feel the pain in your ship, feel your strain in their grip, feel your rise, feel your drive, straining steel, come alive on her jets. Came to him not while he himself was a jetman, but later while he was hitchhiking from Mars to Venus and sitting out a watch with an old shipmate. At Venusburg, he sang his new songs and some of the old in the bars. Someone would start a hat around for him. It would come back with a minstrel's usual take, doubled or tripled in recognition of the gallant spirit behind the bandaged eyes. It was an easy life. Any spaceport was his home, and any ship his private carriage. No skipper cared to refuse to lift the extra mass of blind Reisling in his squeeze box. He shuttled from Venusburg to Layport, to Drywater, to New Shanghai, or back again as the whim took him. He never went closer to Earth than Super New York Space Station. Even when signing the contract for Songs of the Spaceways, he made his mark in a cabin-class liner somewhere between Luna City and Ganymede. Horowitz, the original publisher, was aboard for a second honeymoon and heard Reisling sing at a ship's party. Horowitz knew a good thing for the publishing trade when he heard it. The entire contents of Songs were sung directly into the tape in the communications room of that ship before he let Reisling out of his sight. The next 3 volumes were squeezed out of Reisling at Venusburg, where Horowitz had sent an agent to keep him liquored up until he had sung all he could remember. Up ship is not certainly authentic Reisling throughout. Much of it is Reisling's, no doubt, and Jet Song is unquestionably his, but most of the verses were collected after his death from people who had known him during his wanderings. The green hills of Earth grew through 20 years. The earliest form we know about was composed before Reisling was blinded, during a drinking bout with some of the indentured men on Venus. The verses were concerned mostly with the things the labor clients intended to do back on Earth, if and when they ever managed to pay their bounties, and thereby be allowed to go home. Some of the stanzas were vulgar, some were not, but the chorus was recognizably that of Green Hills. We know exactly where the final form of Green Hills came from, and when. There was a ship in at Venus Ellis Isle, which was scheduled for the direct jump from there to Great Lakes, Illinois. She was the old Falcon, youngest of the Hawk class, and the first ship to apply the Harriman Trust's new policy of extra fare express service between Earth cities and any colony with scheduled stops. Reisling decided to ride her back to Earth. Perhaps his own song had gotten under his skin. Or perhaps he just hankered to see his native Ozarks one more time. The company no longer permitted deadheads. Riesling knew this, but it never occurred to him that the ruling might apply to him. He was getting old for a spaceman, and just a little matter of fact about his privileges. Not senile. He simply knew that he was one of the landmarks in space, along with Halley's Comet, the Rings, and Brewster's Ridge. He walked in the cruise port, went below, and made himself at home in the first empty acceleration couch. The captain found him there while making a last-minute tour of his ship. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "Dragging it back to Earth, Captain." Riesling needed no eyes to see a skipper's 4 stripes. "You can't drag in this ship. You know the rules. Shake a leg and get out of here. We raise ship at once." The captain was young. He'd come up after Riesling's active time, but Riesling knew the type. 5 years at Harriman Hall with only cadet practice trips instead of solid deep space experience. The two men did not touch in background nor spirit. Space was changing. "Now, Captain, you wouldn't begrudge an old man a trip home?" The officer hesitated. Several of the crew had stopped to listen. "I can't do it. Space Precautionary Act, Clause 6. No one shall enter space save as a licensed member of a crew of a chartered vessel or as a paying passenger of such a vessel under such regulations as may be issued pursuant to this act." Up you get and out you go. Riesling lolled back, his hands under his head. "If I've got to go, I'm damned if I'll walk. Carry me." The captain bit his lip and said, "Master-at-arms, have this man removed." The ship's policeman fixed his eyes on the overhead struts. "Can't rightly do it, Captain. I've sprained my shoulder." The other crew members present a moment before had faded into the bulkhead paint. "We'll get a working party." "Aye, aye, sir." He, too, went away. Riesling spoke again. "Now, look, Skipper. Let's not have any hard feelings about this. You've got an out to carry me if you want to. The distressed spaceman clause. Distressed spaceman, my eye. You're no distressed spaceman. You're a space lawyer. I know who you are. Been bumming around the system for years. Well, you won't do it in my ship. The clause was intended to succor men who had missed their ships, not to let a man drag free all over space." "Well, now, Captain, can you properly say I haven't missed my ship? I've never been back home since my last trip as a signed-on crew member. The law says I can have a trip back. But that was years ago. You've used up your chance." "Have I now?" "The clause doesn't say a word about how soon a man has to take his trip back. It just says he's got it coming to him. Go look it up, Skipper. If I'm wrong, I'll not only walk out on my 2 legs, I'll beg your humble pardon in front of your crew. Go on, look it up. Be a sport." Riesling could feel the man's glare, but he turned and stomped out of the compartment. Riesling knew that he'd used his blindness to place the captain in an impossible position. But this did not embarrass Riesling. He rather enjoyed it. 10 minutes later, the siren sounded. He heard the orders on the bullhorn for up stations. When the soft sighing of the locks and the slight pressure change in his ears let him know that takeoff was imminent, he got up and shuffled down to the power room, as he wanted to be near the jets when they blasted off. He needed no one to guide him in any ship of the Hawk class. Trouble started during the first watch. Riesling had been lounging in the inspector's chair, fiddling with the keys of his accordion, trying out a new version of Green Hills. "Let me breathe unrationed air again, where there's no lack nor dearth. Something, 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 earth." It would not come out right. He tried again. "Let the sweet, fresh breezes heal me as they rove around the girth of our lovely mother planet, of the cool green hills of Earth." That was better, he thought. "How do you like that, Archie?" he asked over the muted roar. "Pretty good. Give up the whole thing." Archie McDougal, Chief Jetman, was an old friend, both space-side and in bars. He'd been an apprentice under Riesling many years and millions of miles back. Riesling obliged, then said, "You youngsters have got it soft. Everything automatic. When I was twisting her tail, you had to stay awake. You still have to stay awake. They fell to talking shop, and McDougal showed him the new direct response damping rig, which had replaced the manual vernier control which Reisling had used. Reisling felt out the controls and asked questions until he was familiar with the new installation. It was his conceit that he was still a jetman, and that his present occupation as a troubadour was simply an expedient during one of the fusses with the company that any man could get into. "I see you still have the old hand damping plates installed," he remarked, his agile fingers flitting over the equipment. "All except the links. I unshipped them because they obscure the dials. You ought to have them shipped. You might need them." "Oh, I don't know. I think..." Reisling never did find out what McDougal thought, for it was at that moment the trouble tore loose. McDougal caught it square, a blast of radioactivity that burned him down where he stood. Reisling sensed what had happened. Automatic reflexes of old habit came out. He slapped the Discover and rang the alarm to the control room simultaneously. Then he remembered the unshipped links. He had to grope until he found them while trying to keep as low as he could to get maximum benefit from the baffles. Nothing but the links bothered him as to location. The place was as light to him as any place could be. He knew every spot, every control, the way he knew the keys of his accordion. "Power room! Power room! What's the alarm?" "Stay out!" Reisling shouted. "The place is hot." He could feel it on his face and in his bones like desert sunshine. The links he got into place after cursing anyone, for having failed to rack the wrench he needed. Then he commenced trying to reduce the trouble by hand. It was a long job and ticklish. Presently he decided that the jet would have to be spilled, pile and all. First he reported, "Control! Control, aye, aye. Spilling jet 3. Emergency. Is this McDougal? McDougal's dead. This is Reisling on watch. Stand by to record." There was no answer. Dumbfounded the skipper may have been, but he could not interfere in a power room emergency. He had the ship to consider, and the passengers and crew. The doors had to stay closed. The captain must have been still more surprised at what Reisling sent for record. It was, "We wrought in the molds of Venus. We wretched her tainted breath. Foul are her flooded jungles, crawling with unclean death." Reisling went on cataloging the solar system as he worked. Harsh, bright soil of Luna, Saturn's rainbow rings, the frozen night of Titan, all the while opening and spilling the jet and fishing it clean. He finished with an alternate chorus. "We've tried each spinning space mote and reckoned its true worth. Take us back to the homes of men on the cool, green hills of Earth." Then almost absent-mindedly remembered to tack on his revised first verse. "The arching sky is calling spacemen back to their trade. All hands stand by, free falling, and the lights below us fade. Out ride the sons of Terra. Far drives the thundering jet. Up leaps the race of Earthmen. Out, far, and onward yet." The ship was safe now, ready to limp home, shy one jet. As for himself, Reisling was not so sure. That sunburn seemed pretty sharp, he thought. He was unable to see the bright, rosy fog in which he worked, but he knew it was there. He went on with the business of flushing the air out through the outer valve, repeating it several times to permit the level of radioaction to drop to something a man might stand under suitable armor. While he did this, he sent one more chorus, the last bit of authentic Reisling that ever could be. "We pray for one last landing on the globe that gave us birth. Let us rest our eyes on fleecy skies and the cool green hills of Earth." It takes both agoraphobes and claustrophobes to colonize the moon, or make it agorophiles and claustrophiles. For the men who go out into space had better not have phobias. If anything on a planet, in a planet, or in the empty reaches around the planets can frighten a man, he should stick to Mother Earth. A man who would make his living away from terra firma must be willing to shut up in a cramped spaceship, knowing that it may become his coffin, and yet he must be undismayed by the wide-open spaces of space itself. Spacemen, men who work in space, pilots and jetmen and astrogators and such, are men who like a few million miles of elbow room. On the other hand, the moon colonists need to be the sort who feel cozy burrowing around underground like so many pesky moles. On my second trip to Luna City, I went over to Richardson Observatory both to see the Big Eye and to pick up a story to pay for my vacation. I flashed my journalist guild card, sweet-talked a bit, and ended with the paymaster showing me around. We went out the North Tunnel, which was then being bored, to the site of the projected coronoscope. It was a dull trip. Climb on a scooter, ride down a completely featureless tunnel, climb off and go through an airlock, get on another scooter and do it all over again. Mr. Knowles filled in with sales talk. This is temporary, he explained. When we get the second tunnel dug, we'll cross-connect, take out the airlocks, put a northbound slidewalk in this one, a southbound slidewalk in the other one, and you'll make the trip in less than 3 minutes, just like Luna City or Manhattan. Why not take out the airlocks now, I asked, as we entered another airlock, about the 7th. So far, the pressure's the same on each side of each lock. Knowles looked at me quizzically. You wouldn't take advantage of a peculiarity of this planet just to work up a sensational feature story. I was irked. Look here, I told him. I'm as reliable as the next word mechanic. But if something is not kosher about this project, let's go back right now and forget it. I won't hold still for censorship. Take it easy, Jack, he said mildly. It was the first time he'd used my first name. I noted it and discounted it. Nobody's going to censor you. We're glad to cooperate with you fellas, but the moon's had too much bad publicity now. Publicity it didn't deserve. I didn't say anything. Every engineering job has its own hazards, he insisted, and its advantages, too. Our men don't get malaria. They don't have to watch out for rattlesnakes. I can show you figures that prove it's safer to be a sandhog in the moon than it is to be a file clerk in Des Moines, all things considered. For example, we rarely have any broken bones in the moon. The gravity's so low. Well, that Des Moines file clerk takes his life in his hands every time he steps in or out of his bathtub. Okay, I interrupted, so the place is safe. What's the catch? It is safe. Not company figures, mind you, nor Luna City Chamber of Commerce, but Lloyd's of London. So you keep unnecessary airlocks. Why? He hesitated before he answered. Quakes. Quakes. Earthquakes. Moonquakes, I mean. I glanced at the curving walls sliding past and wished I were in Des Moines. Nobody wants to be buried alive. But to have it happen in the moon, they wouldn't stand a chance. No matter how quick they got to you, your lungs would be ruptured. No air. They don't happen very often, Knowles went on, but we have to be prepared. Remember, the Earth is 80 times the mass of the moon, so the tidal stresses here are 80 times as great as the moon's effect on Earth tides. Come again, I said. There isn't any water on the moon. How can there be tides? You don't have to have water to have tidal stresses. Don't worry about it. Just accept it. What you get is unbalanced stresses that can cause quakes. I nodded. I see. Since everything in the moon has to be sealed airtight, you've got to watch out for quakes. These airlocks are to confine your losses. I started visualizing myself as one of the losses. Yes and no. The airlocks would limit an accident, all right, if there was one, which there won't be. This place is safe. Primarily, they let us work on a section of the tunnel at no pressure without disturbing the rest of it. But they're more than that. Each one is a temporary expansion joint. You can tie a compact structure together and let it ride out a quake. But a thing as long as this tunnel has to give, or it'll spring a leak. A flexible seal is hard to accomplish in the moon. What's wrong with rubber? I demanded. I was feeling jumpy enough to be argumentative. I've got a ground car back home with 200,000 miles on it. Yet I've never touched the tires since they were sealed up in Detroit. Knowles sighed. I should have brought one of the engineers along, Jack. The volatiles that keep rubbers soft tend to boil away in vacuum and the stuff gets stiff. Same for the flexible plastics. When you expose them to low temperature as well, they get brittle as eggshells. The scooter stopped as Knowles was speaking, and we got off just in time to meet half a dozen men coming out of the next airlock. They were wearing spacesuits, or more properly, pressure suits, for they had hose connections instead of oxygen bottles, and no sun visors. Their helmets were thrown back, and each man had his head pushed through the open zipper in the front of his suit, giving him a curiously two-headed look. Knowles called out, "Hey, Konski!" One of the men turned around. He must have been 6'2" and fat for his size. I guessed him at 300 pounds, Earthside. It's Mr. Knowles, he said happily. Don't tell me I've gotten a raise. You're making too much money now, Fatso. Shake hands with Jack Arnold. Jack, this is Fatso Konski, the best sand hog in 4 planets. Only 4? Inquired Konski. He slid his right arm out of his suit and stuck his bare hand into mine. I said I was glad to meet him and try to get my hand back before he mangled it. Jack Arnold wants to see how you seal these tunnels, Knowles went on. Come along with us. Konski stared at the overhead. Well, now that you mention it, Mr. Knowles, I've just finished my shift. Knowles said, Fatso, you're a money grubber, and inhospitable as well. Okay, time and a half. Konski turned and started unsealing the airlock. The tunnel beyond looked much the same as the section we'd left, except that there were no scooter tracks, and the lights were temporary, rigged on extensions. A couple of 100 feet away, the tunnel was blocked by a bulkhead with a circular door in it. The fat man followed my glance. That's the movable lock, he explained. No air beyond it. We excavate just ahead of it. Can I see where you've been digging? Not without we go back and get you a suit. I shook my head. There were perhaps a dozen bladder-like objects in the tunnel, the size and shape of toy balloons. They seemed to displace exactly their own weight of air. They floated without displaying much tendency to rise or settle. Konski batted one out of his way and answered me before I could ask. This piece of tunnel was pressurized today, he told me. These tag-alongs search out stray leaks. They're sticky inside. They get sucked up against the leak, break, and the goo gets sucked in, freezes, and seals the leak. Is that a permanent repair, I wanted to know? Are you kidding? Just shows the follow-up man where to weld. Show him a flexible joint, Knowles directed. Coming up. We paused halfway down the tunnel, and Konski pointed to a ring segment that ran completely around the tubular tunnel. We put in a flex joint every 100 feet. It's glass cloth, gasketed onto the 2 steel sections it joins. Gives the tunnel a certain amount of springiness. Glass cloth to make an airtight seal, I objected. The cloth doesn't seal, it's for strength. You got 10 layers of cloth with a silicone grease spread between the layers. It gradually goes bad from the outside in, but it'll hold 5 years or more before you have to put on another coat. I asked Konski how he liked his job, thinking I might get some story. He shrugged. It's all right. Nothing to it. Only 1 atmosphere of pressure. Now, you take when I was working under the Hudson. And getting paid 1/10 of what you get here, put in Knowles. Mr. Knowles, you grieve me, Konski protested. It ain't the money. It's the art of the matter. Take Venus. They pay as well on Venus, and a man has to be on his toes. The muck is so loose you have to freeze it. It takes real caisson men to work there. Half of these punks here are just miners. A case of the bends would scare 'em silly. Tell 'em why you left Venus, Fatso. Konski expressed dignity. Shall we examine the movable shield, gentlemen, he asked. We putted around a while longer, and I was ready to go back. There wasn't much to see. The more I saw of the place, the less I liked it. Konski was undogging the door of the airlock leading back when something happened. I was down on my hands and knees, and the place was pitch dark. Maybe I screamed, I don't know. There was a ringing in my ears. I tried to get up and then stayed where I was. It was the darkest dark I ever saw, complete blackness. I thought I was blind. A torchlight beam cut through it, picked me out, and then moved on. What was it? I shouted. What happened? Was it a quake? Stop yelling, Konski's voice answered me casually. That was no quake. It was some sort of explosion. Mr. Knowles, you all right? I guess so, he gasped for breath. What happened? Don't know. Let's look around a bit. Konski stood up and poked his beam around the tunnel, whistling softly. His light was the sort that has to be pumped. It flickered. Looks tight, but I hear... Oh, sister. His beam was focused on a part of the flexible joint near the floor. The tag-along balloons were gathering at this spot. 3 were already there. Others were drifting in slowly. As we watched, one of them burst and collapsed in a sticky mass that marked the leak. The hole sucked up the burst balloon and began to hiss. Another rolled into the spot, joggled about a bit, then it too burst. It took a little longer this time for the leak to absorb and swallow the gummy mass. Konski passed me the light. Keep pumping it, kid. He shrugged his right arm out of the suit and placed his bare hand over the spot where, at that moment, a 3rd bladder burst. How about it, Fats? Mr. Knowles demanded. Couldn't say. Feels like a hole as big as my thumb. Sucks like the devil. How could you get a hole like that? Search me. Poke through from the outside, maybe. You got the leak checked? I think so. Go back and check the gauge. Jack, give him the light. Knowles trotted back to the airlock. Presently, he sang out. Pressure steady. Can you read the vernier? Konsky called to him. Sure. Steady by the vernier. How much we lose? Not more than a pound or two. What was the pressure before? Earth normal. Lost a pound 4/10 then. Not bad. Keep on going, Mr. Knowles. There's a tool kit just beyond the lock in the next section. Bring me back a number 3 patch, or bigger. Right. We heard the door open and clang shut. And we were again in total darkness. I must have made some sound, for Konsky told me to keep my chin up. Presently, we heard the door, and the blessed light shone out again. Got it, said Konsky. No, Fatso, no. Knowles' voice was shaking. There's no air on the other side. The other door wouldn't open. Jammed, maybe? No. I checked the manometer. There's no pressure in the next section. Konsky whistled again. Looks like we'll wait till they come for us. In that case, keep the light on me, Mr. Knowles. Jack, help me out of this suit. What are you planning to do? If I can't get a patch, I got to make one, Mr. Knowles. This suit is the only thing around. I started to help him, a clumsy job, since he'd had to keep his hand on the leak. You can stuff my shirt in the hole, Knowles suggested. I'd as soon bail water with a fork. It's got to be the suit. There's nothing else around here that'll hold the pressure. When he was free of the suit, he had me smooth out a portion of the back. Then as he snatched his hand away, I slapped the suit down over the leak. Konsky promptly sat on it. There, he said happily. We've got it corked. Nothing to do but wait. I started to ask him why he hadn't just sat down on the leak while wearing the suit. Then I realized that the seat of the suit was corrugated with insulation. He needed a smooth piece to seal onto that sticky stuff left by the balloons. Let me see your hand, Knowles demanded. It's nothing much, but Knowles examined it anyway. I looked at it and got a little sick. He had a mark like a stigma on the palm, a bloody, oozing wound. Knowles made a compress of his handkerchief and then used mine to tie it in place. Thank you, gentlemen, Konsky told us. Then added, we got time to kill. How about a little pinochle? With your cards, asked Knowles. Why, Mr. Knowles? Well, never mind. It isn't right for paymasters to gamble anyhow. Speaking of paymasters, you realize this is pressure work now, Mr. Knowles. For a pound and 4/10 differential? I'm sure the union would take that view in the circumstances. Suppose I sat on the leak. But the rate applies to helpers, too. Okay, miser. Triple time it is. That's more like your own sweet nature, Mr. Knowles. I hope it's a nice, long wait. How long a wait do you think it'll be, Fatso? Well, shouldn't take them more than an hour, even if they have to come all the way from Richardson. What makes you think they'll be looking for us? Ah? Doesn't your office know where you are? I'm afraid not. I told him I wouldn't be back today. Konsky thought about it. I didn't drop my time card. They'll know I'm still inside. Sure they will. Tomorrow, when your card doesn't show up at my office. There's that lunkhead on the gate. He'll know he's got 3 extra inside. Provided he remembers to tell his relief. And provided he wasn't caught in it, too. Yes. I guess so, Konsky said thoughtfully. Jack, better quit pumping that light. You just use up more oxygen. We sat there in the darkness for quite a long time, speculating about what had happened. Konsky was sure it was an explosion. Knowles said that it put him in mind of a time when he'd seen a freight rocket crash on takeoff. When the talk started to die out, Konsky told some stories. I tried to tell one, but I was so nervous, so afraid, I should say, that I couldn't remember the snapper. I wanted to scream. After a long silence, Konsky said, Jack, give us the light again. I got something figured out. What is it, Knowles asked. If we had a patch, you could put on my suit and go for help. There's no oxygen for the suit. That's why I mentioned you. You're the smallest. There'll be enough air in the suit itself to take you through the next section. Well, okay. What are you going to use for a patch? I'm sitting on it. Ah, This big, broad, round thing I'm sitting on. I'll take my pants off. If I push one of my hams against that hole, I guarantee it'll be sealed tight. But no, Fats, it won't do. Look what happened to your hand. You'd hemorrhage through your skin and bleed to death before I could get back. I'd give you 2 to 1 I wouldn't. For 50, say. You're a cute one, Mr. Knowles. But look, I got 2 or 3 inches of fat padding me. I won't bleed much. Strawberry mark, no more. Knowles shook his head. It's not necessary. If we keep quiet, there's air enough here for several days. It's not the air, Mr. Knowles. Notice it's getting chilly? I had noticed, but hadn't thought about it. In my misery and funk, being cold didn't seem anything more than appropriate. Now I thought about it. When we lost the power line, we lost the heaters, too. It would keep getting colder, and colder, and colder. Mr. Knowles saw it, too. Okay, Fats, let's get on with it. I sat on the suit while Konsky got ready. After he got his pants off, he snagged one of the tag-alongs, burst it, and smeared the sticky insides on his right buttock. Then he turned to me. Okay, kid, up off the nest. We made the swap over fast without losing much air, though the leak hissed angrily. Comfortable as an easy chair, folks, he grinned. Knowles hurried into the suit and left, taking the light with him. We were in darkness again. After a while, I heard Konsky's voice. There's a game we can play in the dark, Jack. You play chess? Why, yes. Play at it, that is. Good game. Used to play it in the decompression chamber when I was working under the Hudson. What do you say to 20 on the side, just to make it fun? Huh? Well, all right. You could have made it 1,000. I didn't care. Fine. King's pawn to king 3. King's pawn to king 4. Conventional, aren't you? Puts me in mind of a girl I knew in Hoboken. What he told about her had nothing to do with chess, although it did prove she was conventional, in a manner of speaking. King's bishop to queen's bishop 4. Remind me to tell you about her sister, too. Seems she hadn't always been a redhead, but she wanted people to think so. So she... Sorry. Go ahead with your move. I tried to think, but my head was spinning. Queen's pawn to queen 3. Queen to king's bishop 3. Anyhow, she... He went on in great detail. It wasn't new, and I doubt if it ever happened to him, but it cheered me up. I actually smiled there in the dark. It's your move, he added. Oh. I couldn't remember the board. I decided to get ready to castle. Always fairly safe in the early game. Queen's knight to queen's bishop 3. Queen advances to capture your king's bishop's pawn. Checkmate. You owe me 20, Jack. Ah. Why, that can't be. Want to run over the moves? He checked them off. I managed to visualize them, then said, well, I'll be a dirty name. You hooked me with a fool's mate. He chuckled. You should have kept your eye on my queen instead of on the redhead. I laughed out loud. Know any more stories? Sure, he told another. But when I urged him to go on, he said, I think I'll just rest a little while, Jack. I got up. You all right, Fats? He didn't answer. I felt my way over to him in the dark. His face was cold, and he didn't speak when I touched him. I could hear his heart faintly when I pressed an ear to his chest, but his hands and feet were like ice. I had to pull him loose. He was frozen to the spot. I could feel the ice, though I knew it must be blood. I started to try to revive him by rubbing him, but the hissing of the leak brought me up short. I tore off my own trousers, had a panicky time before I found the exact spot in the dark, and sat down on it with my right buttock pressed firmly against the opening. It grabbed me like a suction cup, icy cold. Then it was fire spreading through my flesh. After a time, I couldn't feel anything at all except a dull ache and coldness. There was a light someplace. It flickered on, then went out again. I heard a door clang. I started to shout. Knowles, I screamed. Mr. Knowles! The light flickered on again. Coming, Jack. I started to blubber. Oh, you made it. You made it. I didn't make it, Jack. I couldn't reach the next section. When I got back to the lock, I passed out. He stopped to wheeze. There's a crater. The light flickered off and fell clanging to the floor. "Help me, Jack," he said querulously. "Can't you see I need help?" I tried to. I heard him stumble and fall. I called to him, but he didn't answer. I tried to get up, but I was stuck fast. A cork in a bottle. I came to, lying face down with a clean sheet under me. "Feeling better?" someone asked. It was Knowles, standing by my bed, dressed in a bathrobe. "You're dead," I told him. Not a bit, he grinned. "They got to us in time." "What happened?" I stared at him, still not believing my eyes. "Just like we thought. A crash rocket. An unmanned mail rocket got out of control and hit the tunnel. Where's Fats?" "Hi." I twisted my head around. It was Konski, face down like myself. "You owe me 20, he said cheerfully. "I owe you." I found I was dripping tears for no good reason. "Okay. I owe you 20. But you'll have to come to Des Moines to collect it."